I introduced myself.
What?
Introduce myself.
Yeah, I'll have an introduction little thing for before.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hi,
Start again.
that theme song comment took me out. All right. Hello, my name is Chance Hall, and today I'll be talking about police reform in America. So, in America, to talk about police reform, we have to talk about everything that the police do that makes the community feel unsafe. One of them being police brutality, which is a form of police misconduct which involves unnecessary or undue violence by the police members against the community. Although widespread police brutality exists, it is illegal, but it can be performed under the pretense of law, with a popular brand of reasoning being that the officer either felt threatened or mistook an item held in someone's hand for a gun or a weapon that could cause harm to either the officer or anyone in the vicinity. As we see by state, this affects a lot of people unproportionately, but it affects minorities even more out of proportion, which is something that we need to talk about due to the history of police brutality, which has been perpetrated against individuals in lower social economic levels and marginalized and minority communities more than it has affected upper class and more privileged communities. It has victims who encounter police brutality cases nowadays are more minorities, and the officers of these victims are usually found unconvicted or innocent, with very little given in the way of investigating what actually happened or having an actual trial. When it comes to race and police brutality, a lot of defenses for the officer tend to follow stereotypes or hasty generalizations of logical fallacies, where the perception of racial minority citizens as trouble can sometimes translate into racially discriminatory police behavior. Take into instance what just happened at Starbucks when two black men were called for sitting in the Starbucks for 2 minutes while they were waiting for a friend, and what happened afterward when the police actually showed up. This is worse in the United States because it is a melting pot. This is a multiracial, multi-ethnic society in which a lot of minority citizens, people who don't fall into rich and white categories, generally be targeted either consciously or subconsciously due to different levels of racism and microaggressions. Multiple studies confirm that officers do use more force against minorities, with 31% of the people being killed in police shootings being black, although black people make up only 13% of the population of the United States. For Native Americans, the mortality rate is 12% higher than African Americans, and it's 3 times the rate of white people. And for people of Hispanic and Latino descent, the mortality rate is nearly twice the rate of white people. However, they are more likely to be wrongfully charged of drug-related charges, such as possession or dealing. Mental health is also considered a problem. Mental health should also be considered, the mental health of both the officer and the victim, as 25% of all the victims of police brutality had a mental illness that the officer was aware of, and many more events of police brutality show that there was a way that the officer could have handled the situation better, or where the officer themselves were under a lot of stress, or may not have realized that they themselves weren't at their mentally fit. And police brutality against the LGBT community is also common and well documented in history, although it goes more to raiding and leaving cold cases open when an LGBT person is a victim of a crime such as murder, which has recently happened in Toronto, Canada, where a man has just been caught, not by the police, but by the members of the community, after he killed 6 gay men in 3 or 4 weeks. And the police let that case slide away. So there are laws that protect victims from police brutality. The Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title II of Americans with Disability Act lets it be known that any person who, under the color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage, should not be deprived of any rights, privileges, or immunities, which means that you would have your fourth, fifth, and Sixth Amendment right to search and seizure, where it can't happen against you. You wouldn't have to speak up against yourself, and you would have the right to a speedy trial and a fair trial. But while we're talking about the federal government, we have to talk about militarization and how that also factors into what we need to fix when it comes to police reform, where the police have been getting more and more military-grade equipment to help them fight the war on drugs and the war on terror. However, there have been many critics that show that there have been many critics that have used many studies to show that this otherizes the police from the community, where the police see themselves as fighting a war against the bad guys, but since the bad guys are in the community and they're hiding around, it's more likely to be the police versus the community, with the police having a lot more time, money, and equipment to deal with it. This can be seen, this has shown to have more of an effect with police brutality and police abuse of power, as they have the equipment to do so. Body cameras are also something that could help with police reform if we can get them implemented correctly and we can make sure that they can't be tampered with legally by the police officers. There have been cases where tampering has occurred, but the police officer was still caught because there was programming in the camera that saved the footage 30 seconds beforehand. For example, one time in Philadelphia, there was a police officer who was caught planting drugs at a site so he could get a warrant to search the whole site. But when he turned his camera off, he wasn't aware that the camera recorded all of that time plus 30 seconds before and 30 seconds after. So it did show him planting it, and then it did show him circling back and going to look for it. Police brutality and police abuse tie into it because we need to make sure that the people who can protect us, who are supposed to protect us, we need to hold them to a higher standard. We can't let just any person with any vendetta be a police officer. That's corrupt justice. That's justice that's not justice at all. It's not going to work out. The community should feel safe whenever they see a police officer, and they shouldn't have to fear, oh, am I going to be the next person who gets in trouble or who gets harmed by the police? Police brutality is only a part of police corruption when officers and departments make money off of illegal deals and bribes, which is generally to the detriment of the community that they serve. Take civil forfeiture, where officers can take money that they consider to be part of a crime, and with that you have to prove that it's not, and the officers get part of the money. Which leads us to internal problems of police departments, where departments of internal affairs and internal investigations, they're done by officers who work with the officer who was part of an altercation, which leads to an implicit bias and leads to studies like one from the Human Rights Watch that finds that a high percentage of internal affairs departments didn't fully attempt to look into complaints brought up, and a lot of officers got away with smaller punishments for their actions, if they even got a punishment. So multiple times that this has come up in protests, a lot of people keep on asking, who do you call them, the police murder? Stuff like that. Protesting has been ways to try to get the message of police reform out. But we need to talk about multiple things in order to talk about police reform and making sure that the community can feel safe with the police officers, and the police officers can still be able to do their job and to catch the people who are harming the community without harming the community themselves. So another way to do this is through civilian review and civilian review in civil lawsuits, which can help the police officers understand, hey, this is how the community feels about this. And through that, the department and the community can come together to work on issues in which there may be a disconnect and there may be a chance where that discussion needs to happen, so that way the community understands, hey, this, and this is illegal, but the officers can also understand, we think that this, and this is too overpowering and it doesn't make any sense for X crime. And with that, that is why we should have police reform, and these are the many different ways we can go through police reform, and we can make sure that our communities are safer through the people who should be keeping them safe to begin with.